With the sheer size and presence of the Cobra Drome, it can be said that a video detailing its history and amazing features was always inevitable for the purposes of this channel. Let's have a look at this gargantuan playset right here and now. While large playsets for our villains did exist in the years before as well as after the release of the 1986 Drome, it was pretty much expected that our heroes and not our villains would be the ones to get the lion's share of these epic massive sets, and G.I. Joe was no exception to this. Sure, Cobra did have the cardboard-based Missile Command headquarters released in 1982, but until the Drome, the largest plastic-based set by Cobra was probably the 1985 Moray. And even considering all things international, Cobra's European equivalent Red Shadow's counterpart from the Action Force toy line's largest item would probably be the epic 1984 Robo-Skull. Thus, I believe it's safe to say that the Drome broke new ground for the G.I. Joe toy franchise. In fact, while we would still get some dominant Cobra vehicles in the years that would follow, in the minds of many, the Drome stands head and shoulders above the rest as the leading centerpiece Cobra playset during the vintage G.I. Joe, a real American hero, and perhaps in any era of G.I. Joe. In terms of the various forms of canonized fiction, the Drome would initially appear on Cobra Island during the original Marvel Comics run, beginning with issue number 45, and other dromes would pop up around the world later on. It would also show up from time to time during the Sunbow animated cartoon series, particularly during the second season in 1986, both in episodes as well as the opening theme song. It would also appear again in the 1987 animated movie when it was infiltrated by Pythona near the beginning of the film, and later on in the film by Lieutenant Falcon and Sergeant Slaughter's Renegades. A look at the playset itself, and the item measures 24 inches in diameter, though this extends further if you count the gun turrets that protrude in two locations of the drone. It stands 13 inches in height, and again this is slightly taller if you measure its height to the top of the ramparts or at the top of the turrets. For the most part, the Drome serves as a functional headquarters for Cobra the enemy, and geometrically is a two-level structure outfitted with a plethora of features which we will discuss here. I did mention the pair of double-barreled gun turrets here, which are rotatable, and the most obvious thing is that the gunner seats are a bit far away from the turret controls. That said, I suppose this does allow for a second Cobra to stand in front of the gunner, perhaps to give orders or just to have a casual conversation while on duty. While this is a bit silly from a functional basis, it looks fine from a distance for reasons of photography. Take note that the Drome doesn't necessarily have a front side, but I've always treated the side that the gun turrets are on as the playset's front, given that this would be the most ideal for reasons of defense from G.I. Joe attacks. There are numerous computer and control panels that surround the top level, 4 of which have computer screens and seats in front of them. While you can pretty much put any enemy trooper in these seats, I do like to think that the Televiper is the best fit given its communications functionality among the Cobra ranks. Interestingly enough, the chairs that are in front of these control stations are reclinable. There's also various tabs for you to stand other figures on around the inside of the upper level, particularly in front of the various workstations, though this upper level is indeed large enough to fit a lot of enemy ranks, so you can pretty much display whatever you want to your heart's desire. Now, just for the heck of it, I did try to balance the 3D printed Cobra throne that my friend Mark made for me a while ago, and while this is not a perfect balance or necessarily even a practical place for it, if you do want to have Cobra Commander or Serpentor dishing out orders somewhere on the top level, this is definitely possible. Of course, in the center of the top level, the most noticeable feature is the dome-shaped floor opening, which houses the Firebat, aka the vehicle that comes with the Drome. The activation lever for this launch bay is located on the lower level, and when you push the lever from the up position to the down position, the Firebat springs out at the top. And within the launch base of the Firebat is some molded slots for you to actually place the Firebat into prior to launch. One thing of note though is the impractical distance between the launch bay to the control terminals, and that it's far too close to be considered realistic, particularly as the exhaust and fumes would pose a problem, but I suppose this is mitigated by the imaginations of young minds during playtime adventures. The launch bay can also be used to house other smaller Cobra vehicles such as the flight pod and others, so you can use this feature to your heart's desire when reenacting or creating new battlefield play sequences. Do take note as well that the 6 ramparts that surround the top of the structure are quite fragile and the tabs do break quite easily. The Cobra emblem though is detailed nicely onto the front of each of these ramparts. In terms of the lower level of the base, cosmetically it looks just like a solid fortress that would be difficult for anyone to invade, but each panel does open in either a flip down or a more traditional door opening manner, and each of the 8 panels reveals a room inside that serve various functions. What's neat as well is that each room has a door opening that allows you to go from one room to another. Do take note though that there's also no staircase or elevator for figures to travel up and down between the top and bottom floors. But before we open each panel, I'd like to point out that the Cobra Claw Glider can hang onto the outside of some of these panels. Now while I'm not sure if this was designed intentionally, it's pretty common for collectors to use them for this reason. When you open the lower level panels, 3 of the rooms serve as identical fueling stations, and some vehicles, such as the Cobra Ferret, have an actual location built in to put the fuel pump on. 2 of the panels open up to reveal more double-barreled cannons, and due to the way this part is designed, the gunner is protected on the inside, and I assume the gunner has to look through the terminal unit in front of him since there's no visor or opening on the door itself. And yes, my cannons aren't tabbed all the way in, as they are tight enough of a fit as is and already show some stress marks at the connection point. Like the cannons mounted at the top level of the Terror Drome, these cannons can also be angled up and down. These particular gunner panels can also be stabilized by a fold-down strut that you can use as an anchor of sorts. Similar to the 1983 G.I. Joe headquarters, the Terror Drome has a jail cell of its own where you can put in some captive good guys with some room in front for some Cobra guards. The no smoking sign here is also kind of a clever addition and a nice touch, though I seem to be missing a few of these stickers even if I do have a few of them. I've already mentioned the room that houses the lever which launches the Firebat, and the last room is presumed to be a rec room or a miscellaneous area of sorts. And I know that this room has been purposefully left empty by the designers, but just speaking for myself, if I did want to emulate the 1987 animated movie ever so slightly, it's possible to put the previously mentioned Cobra throne without the base right here and treat it as Serpentor's throne room. It's probably not in an ideal spot, as you could assume that in a perfect world, the Drome would be a lot bigger and the throne room would be in a more centralized location, but looking at it from a child's imagination, it does add some level of play value and even some adult age display factor to it. The Firebat jet that comes with this playset does add a lot to the desirability of this iconic Cobra headquarters. It's a mid-sized vehicle in a fierce looking maroon color, outfitted with 6 bombs, underneath with 2 chin guns. 4 of the bombs are identical to each other, while the other 2 are a different shape and identical to one another as well. The chin gun tabs are indeed fragile though, so if you do happen to find this vehicle with them intact, I suggest not removing and reattaching them repeatedly on any regular basis. The tabs are a tight enough fit as is without needing to do this. The wings fold down to ready the Firebat into a standard flight mode, but they also fold up when you insert it into its launch bay. The wheels on the back of the Firebat are fixed and molded in as part of the vehicle and not rotational like other G.I. Joe vehicles of its time. You can also remove the engine covers on both sides of the Firebat. The cockpit is a tight fit for the AVAC pilot if you leave the AVAC's parachute on, so if you want to give yourself an easier time, you may want to consider removing the parachute before placing the AVAC into the cockpit. Note that the Firebat was also released in 1988 as a mail-away vehicle, albeit in a lighter red color, and this lighter red color was also reused for yet another Firebat release in 2008. And an interesting fact I found out much later on is that the Firebat was slightly retooled, but for the most part reused in 1994 for an altogether different franchise, namely VR Troopers. Notably, the Firebat first appeared in 1985's Lights Camera Cobra episode, albeit in a gray color ahead of the Terror Drome's release as a toy. By 1986, it would appear in its proper color scheme in the cartoon, albeit flown by various Cobra pilots and not necessarily with the AVAC. The AVAC pilot itself would appear in the cartoon in 1985, and like the Firebat, this was ahead of the 1986 toy release. And as we transition to a discussion about the AVAC, you'll notice the really cool color scheme of silver and red, which makes him stand out on your shelf even when not displayed as a vehicle driver. He's also got a bit of a peculiar shaped helmet. While we were never told initially what the AVAC acronym stood for, the 2008 release stated it as standing for Air Viper Advanced Class. So while this seems to be a retcon fitted into the G.I. Joe canon after the fact, it is an acronym that makes sense. His parachute pack tabs onto both sides as mentioned earlier and is removable. My AVAC happened to come with a bilingual French-English file card and notes that they are pilots that are so advanced that they make up for the Firebat's lack of onboard computer systems, having to perform their own mental calculations while airborne inside the Firebat. The American file card further adds that the Firebat not only lacks onboard computer systems, but elaborates that the Firebat actually basically has no amenities at all, not even basic output readings like engine status, weather instruments, navigation aids, and also no ejection seat. So talk about dangerous flying. Yet somehow the best Cobra pilots still want to fly the Firebats. I do also want to take a moment and point out the incredible box and box art that came with the Terrordrome originally. As you can see, the box displays many, if not all of the same functions discussed in this video, and also shows a wide range of enemy characters to boot. Honestly, there's a ton to like about the Cobra Terrordrome. Being one of the larger playsets during the vintage, golden era of toys, it does occupy a ton of real estate, so there's some debate as to whether or not it's worth buying one of these if you can't display it, as depending on your own personal setup, it could end up being something that gets put away into storage. Yes, the vintage commercial showed the Terrordrome as having a rotating top level, a feature that didn't make it into final production, but that being said, I don't think this hinders or detracts from the playability of this enormous Cobra headquarters at all. All of that considered, there's no denying that it is an absolute centerpiece of any Cobra collection, given its place in toy history and its purpose in G.I. Joe lore. It's no exaggeration to say that they don't make them like they used to. I have also heard that in internet fan circles that a USS flag owner can call him or herself as a member of the Admirals Club. On the other hand, I have heard that the Cobra Terrordrome owners can call themselves members of the Commanders Club. What a fitting name for those who proudly have one of these. Anyway, talk to me in the comments section. Where do you rank the Terrordrome in terms of amazing G.I. Joe playsets? Is it more important and iconic to you than the other large G.I. Joe playsets? Let's hear about it. Special thanks to the Patreon supporters and channel members for their ongoing support into the Toy Connections YouTube channel. Their names can be found in the description section below, and you can become a patron yourself by going to patreon.com/toyconnections or become a channel member by clicking the join button next to my channel name. Now, if you enjoyed this video, don't go anywhere just yet. You can have a look at another colossal-sized G.I. Joe playset by clicking on the link right up here. Or you can have a tour of my vintage toy collection right over here. And with that, yo Joe, and I'll see you again next time. Thanks again, and take care.